Welcome everyone to the 10th webinar in our series on integrating with ArchivesSpace. Each webinar in this series highlights an integration with another application used in archives that ArchivesSpace members have worked on or requested. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by ArchivesSpace Program Manager Christine DeBella and Megan Forbes and Linda Collette of CollectionSpace. This webinar will be an open discussion on an integration between ArchivesSpace and CollectionSpace, a museum-focused open source collections management system. In this webinar, representatives from both ArchivesSpace and CollectionSpace will briefly highlight the core elements of each application, how they are similar and where they differ in terms of functionality and the types of content they describe. An open discussion on community use cases and goals for an ArchivesSpace-CollectionSpace integration will follow. The foundation of this discussion will be the initial feedback received on the recent survey disseminated by CollectionSpace about what their community wants in an ArchivesSpace-CollectionSpace integration. We'll hold all questions until the Q&A session at the end, though if you think of a question during the session, you may type it into the Q&A panel at any time. We do ask that you type your question into the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen and not the chat option. Optionally, if you'd like to speak instead of typing into the Q&A, raise your virtual hand and I will unmute you during the discussion. Your presenters today are Megan Forbes, Christine DeBella, and Linda Collette. Megan Forbes leads the day-to-day operations of the CollectionSpace organizational home, including release planning, community outreach, and coordination with other Lyrasis programs. Megan has been a part of the CollectionSpace team since its inception in 2008 and holds deep knowledge of the system and its functional design. Megan also serves as the co-director of the It Takes a Village OSS Sustainability Models of Collaboration and Sustainability project. She has an MA in Library and Information Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BA in Economics and History from Emory University. Christine DeBella is the Program Manager for ArchivesSpace and is involved in all aspects of the program, working closely and collaboratively with the community, advisory groups, and governance board to set and implement the strategy and goals for ArchivesSpace. Christine has worked as an archivist for over 20 years in academic and nonprofit settings, including some where she managed both archives and art and artifact collections. Linda Collette has 20+ years experience in collections management and digital planning in the museum field. Her outreach work with CollectionSpace involves speaking with the museum community on how their collections management system needs fit within their overall digital strategy. She is also an adjunct art history teacher at Northern Virginia Community College. And with that, I'll welcome Megan, Christine, and Linda. And Megan, if you'll start us off.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar. It's great to see such a good crowd, and I will also be the first to say that I have some children homeschooling in my home today, and so if you do as well and you need to step away, we're here for you when we understand. So I'm going to start out with a very quick trip down memory lane. As Jessica mentioned, I've been involved with CollectionSpace since it started in 2008. And so almost 10 years ago, so a little bit after it started, a meeting was held at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York City. So that's where I used to work. I was the director of the collection there, and we were among the founding partners of CollectionSpace. So representative from 3 projects funded by the Mellon Foundation, ArchivesSpace, although I can't remember if they had the name yet, CollectionSpace, and OLE, which is a library, an ILS, were there to talk about integration. So we were all new projects. We were all still figuring out what we wanted to be, but knowing even then that there were these strong connections among our platforms and audiences. So we had all these spreadsheets that we'd brought to this meeting that showed what kinds of workflows we'd support and even the fields that we would have, and we wondered if there was this way to align our technical stacks to sort of be this integrated system from the start. So it was a great idea, but following the lead of our community needs, the 3 projects obviously ended up taking very different paths after that meeting 10 years ago. We of course have completely different technical stacks. ArchivesSpace and CollectionSpace ended up at Lyrasis. OLE actually ended up sunsetting its first version. It's now rebranded as Folio. It's housed at the Open Knowledge Foundation. We have different sustainability plans, right? ArchivesSpace is a member and community-driven program. CollectionSpace relies on earned income from services and support. So what hasn't changed, though, I think, is the interest with our programs and our communities around working together. So one of the most frequently asked questions that we get on the CollectionSpace side is, do CollectionSpace and ArchivesSpace integrate? We probably set ourselves up for that when we chose names that were so similar, but we're living with that decision. The fun thing, I think, about the word integration is that it can mean just about anything to just about anyone. Officially, integration is the process of linking together different computing systems and software applications physically or functionally so they can talk to each other and or act as a coordinated whole. So for some people, when they think of integration, they're thinking of our idea from 10 years ago. One big system that handles everything according to the specific standards of their profession, with no redundant data, no duplicated workflows. To quote The Princess Bride, those people might need to get used to disappointment. For the most part, we like having separate systems. We don't want to cram museum workflows into ASpace or try to turn CSpace away from object-based description. But there are places where we see connections on a smaller scale. People might just want single sign-on or a way to harmonize all the personal names or shared discovery. So the goal of this webinar today, to reiterate Jessica's nice framing of it, is we would like to hear those use cases from you. When you ask about integration or when you think about integration, what are you trying to accomplish? What workflows aren't working? It's okay if you are not totally sure or you're not sure how to articulate it. So just start typing in the Q&A, just start talking, and we will work through it together. If you're not comfortable jumping in, Linda has lined up a few brave souls who are going to volunteer their use cases to break the ice. So we'll hear from them in a little bit. The last thing I want to say before I pass the baton to Christine for a quick ASpace overview is that we do want to be really clear that we are in the brainstorming phase here. So we are trying to get a better idea of what people need so we can work to turn things into real functional requirements. We can prioritize among our different communities and lyricists, try to find resources to support the development, organizations who are interested in sponsoring development. So there are a lot of steps before the ideas that we talked to today turn into reality, and some might never. So we just wanted to set those expectations that we're brainstorming, we're trying to get some concrete use cases around integrations, but that's really where we are right now. So again, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and I'm going to hand it over to Christine.
Thanks, Megan. So I've got just a very small set of slides that for those of you who've been coming to these webinars for a while, you usually wouldn't see because you're very familiar with ArchivesSpace at this point. But I know that we have some newer folks or some people that are very much from the CollectionSpace community, and ArchivesSpace might not be that familiar to you. So I'm just going to give a short overview of ArchivesSpace, but really the focus of this is primarily is going to be, this webinar is going to be how the two systems could potentially someday work together. So, and some of you, I will admit, some of these are from my usual stump speech, so some of you have seen these plenty of times, so bear with us, please. So ArchivesSpace, when we talk about ArchivesSpace, we really are talking about a few different things. And first and foremost, of course, people think of the application. ArchivesSpace is an archives information management software application. It supports a range of functions performed in archives and special collections, things like accessioning, arrangement, description, preservation, and access. Some of those functions, probably most of those functions, are also performed in a museum setting or with individual objects, even if they have a slightly different name. ArchivesSpace is used by archivists, special collections librarians, metadata analysts, curators, and pretty much anyone who works with archives and special collections materials, things like manuscripts, rare books, photographs, ephemera, recordings, even artifacts. It could potentially be using ArchivesSpace. And we can probably think of at least one person, and often many more, from all those different segments of our wider community that are using ArchivesSpace to do those things. ArchivesSpace did not start from scratch. We're the successor to two widely used open source applications, Archivist Toolkit and Archon. So there are things in the application that come from both of those applications. The idea of bringing these two together was sort of to take what was good in each of them and make something that was stronger from the product. ArchivesSpace is developed by archivists and supported by diverse archival repositories in the world. There are some open source solutions like us, but in general, this is a need for archives that has few proprietary vendor solutions. When we talk about ArchivesSpace, though, we don't just talk about the application. We also talk about ArchivesSpace as a community of people working together to improve, to create and improve an application that reflects our values. And again, I think probably most of these values are also common to the CollectionSpace community. We're standards driven. Standards that are used in the archives community like DAX, EAD, MarkXML, EACCPF, standards from the digital communities, things like MODS, METS, and Dublin Core. And then ArchivesSpace can be crosswalked to support a range of other standards, things like ISAG and ISAR-CPF, but also potentially standards that are used in the museum community. Or more extensively in the museum community. ArchivesSpace is intended to be flexible and extensible. In archives, I think most of us have come around to the idea that you don't just touch something one time. You may touch it many times over its lifespan, and as needs come up, you can go back and make something more robust. You can correct something. You can do something else to it to serve a different kind of need. ArchivesSpace is also intended to be flexible so that nobody has to use the entire suite of things that are in ArchivesSpace. They can use only the things that they most need. ArchivesSpace is also intended to be customizable and localizable, so it can be used in different language contexts. It can be used in different institutional contexts, and it can be customized to sort of look different or behave differently upon what people's needs are. ArchivesSpace is intended to promote efficiency in doing the different functions that I mentioned. And also ArchivesSpace, and this is again what we're talking about here, is intended to integrate with other applications that people use to do their work. So we very much come at this from the idea that we're going to do the functions that we are here to support the functions that we do really well, and not be that one system to rule them all, as Megan was describing, but to really form a really excellent piece for the functions that we support and integrate with other applications to do other pieces that they do really well. And then I also always say that ArchivesSpace is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to help people manage and make available as much archival material as possible, no matter what their setting, and promote adoption of standards and develop shared best practices, even if they're in a smaller organization for whom that would usually seem out of reach. There are a lot of common problems in our fields, and being able to use the same system, it's an opportunity to just sort of make everybody be able to do what they do maybe a little bit better. And it's also an opportunity, as we're seeing in this webinar, to bring communities together to solve common problems. Lastly, I'll just mention we are community supported open source software. We are free to download. The application is free to download and use, but we do have a sustainability model that involves membership, as Megan said. We currently have over 400 general member institutions, and our members span most of the continents of the world, and we also have educational program members and registered service providers. Using the application doesn't require membership, but members do have the greatest say in the application's future, and they also get benefits to help them use it and participate in the wider community. And by having membership and people that support membership, that makes possible things that benefit everybody. These are mostly for the slides that I have at the end here are mostly for people who might download this presentation later, but we have a lot of great resources on our website and on YouTube. There's lots of different ways to play around with ArchivesSpace if you want to see more. And then I do encourage you, if you aren't already, to consider membership if you're going to go forward with using ArchivesSpace in conjunction with CollectionSpace or in some other way. And do feel free to get in touch with us anytime at our email address, archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. And now I'm going to turn it over to Linda. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Christine. My name is Linda Collette. I am the Senior Outreach Representative for CollectionSpace, and I'm going to talk a bit about CollectionSpace. And then afterwards, we will open it up to the community to discuss their needs. But first, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about CollectionSpace. And just so you know, this is an active and open discussion. So feel free to enter any comments or ideas or questions in the Q&A section. And the foundation of this discussion is based on the initial feedback we received on the recent survey that CollectionSpace disseminated about what our community wants in an ArchivesSpace CollectionSpace integration. So for those who haven't filled out the survey yet, I would really encourage you to do so. Megan will put that into the chat box so that you have access to that. As you know, CollectionSpace and ArchivesSpace were all about developing services around the needs and ideas of our communities. So your survey responses are very important to us. So my part of the webinar is to introduce you to CollectionSpace. So what is CollectionSpace? It is a web-based open source collections information management system in daily use at dozens of museums and collecting organizations, from cataloging and loans to inventory and digital asset management. CollectionSpace is used to manage many of the day-to-day activities of collections professionals who work with art, artifacts, objects, and specimens. CollectionSpace began in 2008 as a collaboration amongst universities and museums who wanted to work together to develop an open source collections management solution that would focus on what all collecting organizations have in common, rather than all of us continuing to support different proprietary solutions for every collection type. Lyrasis is the organizational home for CollectionSpace, and as the organizational home, Lyrasis manages human and financial resources to help the community grow. They provide engineering talent to strengthen and improve the application and respond to the ever-changing needs of the community, and creates partnerships with key organizations to expand our community and improve our domain expertise. So how is CollectionSpace built? Well, the core CollectionSpace data model is based on the Spectrum Documentation Standard, which focuses on those things that most collecting organizations have in common. We all have names, identification numbers, and storage locations. Our technical platform allows us to go a step further and develop extensions that support domain-specific practice, such as determination history for an herbarium or emulation data for a new media collection. Organizations can also add fields that support specific institutional practices. So CollectionSpace is a community-supported application. What the software does, what our development priorities are, it all comes from our community. There are some links here that you can check out after the webinar where we share the slides. Our wiki is where we have all our in-progress stuff. What's our new dashboard going to look like? What do we want to default fields to be in our public browser? Things like that. And our talk list is used by all implementers to have conversations with one another and ask for support. We also have a new collections blog that we're using to tell the stories of our implementers which can give you a great idea of what's possible with CollectionSpace. So this year in 2020, we've made a lot of new technical developments. We launched our version 6.0 of CollectionSpace, which has some great new features, including advanced search capabilities, and a flexible public collections browser, which is built to integrate with existing content management systems, robust tools to store and describe a wide variety of digital assets, including images, documents, audio, and video files, import-export tools to help facilitate data cleanup, and a use of collection procedure to track research visits. And we're always actively planning our technical roadmap with inputs from our community of users. And that's why this webinar is very pertinent to us right now. We're very interested in the integration piece and finding out how we can integrate with other applications, specifically ASpace. So we're very interested to hear what you guys all have to say. So today's collections management systems cannot stand alone from other technologies used by museums and other collecting organizations to connect and interact with their audiences. CollectionSpace was designed to be connected with other open source efforts serving the arts, humanities, social and natural sciences, such as digital asset management and preservation systems, federated search harvesters, and virtual shared collections. And all data in CollectionSpace is available via a native API. So as noted on the last slide, our research has found that most organizations tend to stick with their collections management systems for more than 10 years. So we'd like everyone to be able to try CollectionSpace out before committing, or even just if you're curious to know what we're about. And there's a number of ways you can do that. We have a demo site up that has the latest version of CollectionSpace installed, and it's open for anyone to try out. And we also have these collection walkthroughs every couple of weeks to sign up for, and are always happy to schedule one-on-one meetings to talk through your specific use cases. We also can set up a private sandbox for you for 30 days if you're curious just to play around with the system. And we can even import some data into it so that you can really get a feel for how CollectionSpace would fit your organization and workflows. So as mentioned earlier by my colleagues, the foundation of this discussion was the initial feedback received on the recent survey. And we received about 35 responses, so we would love to have more. And as mentioned, a survey link is in the chat room for those who haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet. But I will step you through the survey results for what we have with the 35 results, because we still have some interesting findings from it. So not surprisingly, the majority of you are from, or majority that filled out the survey are from archives, followed by a good percentage from museum and galleries with archives. We also have diverse institutions such as historical societies, special collections within libraries, and hybrid institutions who are interested in this integration of ArchivesSpace and CollectionSpace. 45% of the survey responders have fewer than 10,000 objects in their collection, followed by those that have a size range of about 10,000 to 100,000 objects, followed by about a smaller amount, around 11%, who have over 1 million objects. And then there's a small percentage that have over 100,000 objects. So it's really kind of a different mixtures of how many objects that the responders have in their collection. But the majority of them had fewer than 10,000. 60% of the responders have archival collections, as the majority of you are ArchivesSpace users. And 28% have both archival and museum collections, thus the interest for this integration need. But we have about 81 attendees here today who are interested in this integration. So I think that these graphs would be interested to see whether this is still the same results when we get answers from everyone. So those who responded have majority of archival materials in their holdings, probably about 75% to 90%. And since we mainly surveyed ArchivesSpace users, it's not surprising that most are using ArchivesSpace. But with 81 participants in the webinar, as mentioned, I would be very curious to know more about your collections needs. So I would now like to draw our attention to the Q&A section to discuss various ways we can think about our hybrid needs for managing both archives and collections, and what scenarios we should consider when integrating these two platforms, CollectionSpace and ArchivesSpace. So we're interested in, having people here talk about what their challenges are, what their workflows are, and what type of questions their patrons are asking. So I definitely had a few conversations first with some of our participants that we know of, as part of our CollectionSpace and ArchivesSpace community. Linda Hocking from Litchfield, Robin from the Harvard University Archives, and Jill from the Briscoe Center at UT Austin. So I hope they don't mind. I'm going to pick on them, which I've warned them in advance, because they have some really good, interesting use cases to talk about. So I think it would be great if Linda could start us off. And if you can raise your hand, Linda, then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then our facilitator, Jessica, will open the mic for you.
All right, yeah. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, other Linda, for raising your hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Linda Hocking so she can talk a little bit about her use case. I am seeing that we're also getting some comments in the chat, or in the Q&A, which I really appreciate, not the chat. We will get to those in just a second, but Linda, with your hand raised, I am going to go ahead and unmute you now. So go ahead and I'm going to select allow to talk. You are now muted, but you can unmute yourself. So whenever you feel ready, just unmute yourself and start talking.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, so I work at the Litchfield Historical Society in Litchfield, Connecticut, and our collections include quite a few artifacts that specifically relate to our archival holdings. So we were looking for a way to have our users and our staff be able to find all of those things in one search interface. So I'm thinking it was 2009 or 10, got a grant from IMLS to create what we are calling Bento Space, which is an integrated search tool. I put a link in the chat to that search tool. We haven't, because it was grant funded and we do not have developers or technology people on staff, we haven't been able to update it or do really much beyond keeping the systems of ArchivesSpace and CollectionSpace updated. And the one other thing which you can't really see publicly is that we at the same time developed an authority management dashboard where we can share authorities between Bento Space and CollectionSpace and decide which version we want to use. One of the big problems we've had over the years with our artifact collection is that there's a real lack of standardization and a real lack of any sort of rules for how data is entered. And so we've had a lot of volunteers and interns enter what are duplicate people, but they don't realize that the person is already there under a different name. It's like Mrs. Husband's name, or they're missing the middle initial or something like that. So one thing we continue to struggle with is that standardization. And another thing we'd also really love is some sort of sharing of subject headings or subject headings at all in CollectionSpace. Was there anything else you wanted me to share?
Yeah, that's great, Linda. That was
Okay.
really, I learned a lot myself. I was looking at stuff on the web about Bento Space, but it's much better when I hear it in person. And I'm actually curious, you mentioned a few things which I think can be very universal, like the need for authority management, the need for standardization, sharing of subject headings. I'm curious from the group out there of attendees, whether you have similar challenges. Wondered if anybody wants to raise their hand or put something in the Q&A.
Linda Hawking,
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and mute you again, just so it would make me nervous to know I was unmuted and anything could happen. But we have had some comments in the Q&A that are relevant. Specifically, Mary says rights and reproduction management is something that happens in collections departments and archives. A way to manage those with references to each system of record would be of interest, and authority management for artwork titles is huge.
That's good to know. I mean, this is always like helpful. Jessie mentioned something too. She's over at the Ohio History, that they do have similar changes. Shared authority is high on our list between A space and C space. And Mary Haberly says authority management for artworks titles is huge. I'm going to assume that would normally be in caps. Anybody else want to add to that? Jessica, can I go ahead and respond to some of these Q&As, or did you want to read them?
Dive in.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead. I will just read them in the order they were received. So first we have a comment from Marjorie, who is saying that she is responsible for university art collection, for the university art collection and for university history artifacts, as well as university archives. So are there any models for that kind of integration, or any workflows to assist her?
I'm going to let maybe one of my colleagues think about that. I have to think about that a little bit more. A really good question, though.
Or I think, this is Megan. I think this is a really good where Sarah, we might, or no, who was that, Marjorie? We might ask you to put in a little bit more about the kinds of workflows that you're wanting to support that maybe need data from both systems. So you've got your university art collection, you've got a museum collections management system, you have university archives, you have A-Space. So what are you trying to do with materials from both that might make an integration helpful? So an example might be, maybe you want to, you're putting up an exhibit. Someone else has mentioned exhibiting. We're putting up an exhibit, and there are materials from both the museum and the archives that are going to go on exhibit. And so I need to be able to track the usage. Just one example. But if you, in the Q&A, if you could put maybe a workflow or a use case that you're thinking of, that would be great.
Yeah, and Marjorie, you can comment directly on the question you submitted or submit something again. And if there's anyone in the audience who would like to add or has a similar use case, please feel free to share as well. And to what you said, Megan, Jessie says yes to exhibits as well. All right, diving back into the Q&A. Sarah says, I'm here at Seton Hall University. We'd be very interested in shared public search, as well as back-end functions such as sharing but not unifying a session's information, and ideally, if possible, digital asset management. Jessie comments, shared accessioning processes is also on our list.
Okay, so then you know what I'm going to ask for Sarah. Jessie, I've talked to, but it would be fun for others who don't know Jessie as well as I do to hear from her. So Sarah, when you say sharing but not unifying a session's information, can you, and it's fine to just write a little novel in the Q&A. That's fine. We'd love to see it. So understanding, so I'll pick on Linda Hawking, who I also know. So in that case, Litchfield things come in and then they get split up. And so half of the things that come in a given donation might go into the archives and half might go into the artifact collection. And so I know that there's, always been this interest in making sure we understand, okay, all these things came in, and Jessie at Ohio History has similar. All these things came in, we want to know that they came in from the same person at the same time as part of the same donation. Maybe they had one deed of gift, but then they got split up. And so how do we kind of make sure that they maintain that institutional history together? So I don't want to put words in your mouth, Sarah. So if you could talk a little bit about what that shared accessions information might look like. That would be great. And just for anyone out there, don't feel like you're going to write too much in the Q&A. The more detail and the more specific the workflow, that's actually really helpful to us, because we're really trying to think about where are those crosswalks where, you know, maybe we're in CollectionSpace and we want to pull in a little bit of data from ASpace so that then you can run archival materials, you know, through an exhibitions workflow. So really understanding where those connections are is what's super helpful for us.
Awesome, thanks. And Sarah or anyone else, if it does feel like you're writing a novel and it would just be easier to talk it out, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you or give you permission to unmute yourself so that you can maybe talk it through if that's a little bit easier. So if there's anyone who has a thought and they just don't want to type it out, please feel free to raise your hand. All right, moving on through what's in the Q&A now. Julia says, exhibit management that lets us track items from both our archives and our object collections. And then she commented but shared discovery is our biggest concern right now. I'm concerned about asking users to figure out so many buckets, ASpace, Islandora, library catalog, CollectionSpace, etc.
Julia, this is Linda Collette. I'm very curious about your shared discovery being your biggest concern, and I could totally get that because I think many of you have these hybrid institutions where you have so many different things you're cataloging in many different systems that just need to talk to each other somehow. What would you say would be your like number one kind of like shared discovery need? You know, would it be as simple as anything that relates, you know, to all those, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 systems together, whether it's a, you know, an object that relates to all of those? I mean, is there a way to kind of narrow down, you know, what that shared discovery would be? And others could answer that same question, because I'm guessing that a lot of you have that same challenge of having these multiple systems that are managing things. You know, so what I think we're talking about is, you know, everybody has a lot of data and there's going to be some kind of similarities between them. And that's kind of where we want to pull those relationships from. And that's kind of what that whole integration means, you know, which is all about how to link these applications together and pull what you want to do. But you could think about it some more, Julia, and you could always respond at another time.
Yeah, and so Julia has raised her hand. So,
Okay.
so Julia, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And while I'm doing that, Marjorie Sly has also unmuted her hand. So I'm going to respond to, since Julia and Marjorie have both contributed comment, I'm going to go ahead and unmute them, Julia first and then Marjorie, so that they can clarify. But if you have something in the Q&A, we haven't forgotten about it. We're going to get back to it. And you can always, if someone makes a point in the Q&A that you agree with, please feel free to +1. It's always important to know when people agree. So Julia, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. Whenever you feel ready, just unmute yourself and start speaking to the group.
Hi, I will try and make this as articulate as I can. So, because, you know, that's a big question to try and think through. So we have a lot of buckets of content. We have our finding aids in ArchivesSpace. When we are bringing in objects, those are going to our special collections department. So we're splitting those collections. And then we have Islandora for digitized and digital assets. So I right now I'm trying to think through the user experience and the user expectation for if I'm coming and I am searching for, let's say we have an Enigma machine, which is housed in our special collections department. Where is that user going to come and try and search for that? So I guess part of it my goal is at least trying to find either streamlined ways where we can pipe all of this data into our library catalog in a way that makes sense, or at least a way that we can link the records from a collection to the objects, even if it is just kind of readily putting please see related material in CollectionSpace in a way that's kind of more automated than us having to, you know, maintain all of those notes and keep them up to date. I don't know if that made any sense at all.
Oh, yeah, definitely did. And it actually, Julia, it actually
100%.
Yeah. It reminds me of many years ago when I worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and my job was as a standards manager to manage the standards of the 17 different curatorial departments who pretty much spoke 17 different languages. And so they had all this data, and we had to figure out, like, they couldn't come up with a common language. You know, how they defined culture in European painting and sculpture was very different than how they define that in the, you know, Costume Institute. So we had to create kind of a central way on top of it so that we could have a central vocabulary to search across all these 17 different databases. So I'm not saying that we're planning to do that, but I'm just saying that's my use case from many years ago. And just so you know, we never truly solved the standards problem.
Yeah.
It still goes on, but you know, it's definitely a universal problem to have, because you know there's a lot to know about all these works. So you know, so what I'm hearing from you is you're trying to find ways to streamline where you can pipe all this data in, and have some related references. So as you mentioned, maybe in CSpace, it would say, you know, go ahead and see a space for this information. And then maybe the field has a link and it takes you there.
Yeah.
So like
yeah,
that,
I mean, I think a limit that the idea that the buckets things are in should be essentially unimportant to users, even if they're important to us.
So so some of this may not even have to be, like users don't have to necessarily see that, you know, that there are these related links. Sometimes it can happen seamlessly, and sometimes it has to be kind of right there in their face so they understand where they're being directed to. So I think there's so many different scenarios for this. So learning about these integration ideas is very helpful. Let's move on to some of the other integration challenges.
Sure. Thanks, Julia. All right, Marjorie Sly has her hand raised, so I'm gonna go ahead, Marjorie, and allow you to talk, and then we're gonna dive back into the Q&A. I know we have 10 outstanding questions. We will get to them. Oh, Marjorie, you just lowered your hand. So I'm gonna assume you don't want to talk anymore. If you still want to, okay, now your hand's raised again. Okay, I'm gonna allow you to talk.
That was me talking too much. Sorry, go right ahead.
Feel free to unmute yourself and speak whenever you're ready.
Sorry, I was just anticipating not wanting to have my hand raised in perpetuity there. So as I mentioned in my original question, we are responsible for the university art collection, university history artifacts, as well as the university archives. Right now, the art collection's in past perfect. The artifacts were migrated into ArchivesSpace, and boy, is that ugly. So we'd love to extract them and put them into something like CollectionSpace. And as people have said before, the opportunity for shared authorities is huge. It's a lot of it's university content, so it's all the same authorities. The same accessioning process would be great. Clearly shared lookup across all the collections, so somebody would know that we had a painting of the founder, his death mask, and his personal papers, as well as the Office of President's Records. I'm particularly interested in internal and insurance valuation information, and making sure that's consistent across the various buckets. And it would truly be a wonderful thing to be able to publish information about our artifacts and art collection so that the public could do their own lookup, and we wouldn't have to do that for them. So that's just some of my interests.
Thanks, Marjorie.
Welcome.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely picked up that you have this opportunity for shared authorities and this interest about making things consistent across various buckets and trying to figure out where to put data in what system. So like you said, you had Past Perfect, ASpace. There's a lot of things that CSpace could do for you more in terms of, you know, the type of insurance valuation and other information that you need to keep track of. So I'm curious to talk more with you about that.
Awesome. All right, we're gonna move back into the Q&A. I'm gonna move through the current open questions so that they get addressed, but I just wanna point out that there's some great conversation and some supplemental information being provided in the answered section. I hope to get to it at the end, but there's some great conversation happening there, and please feel free to respond to other people's questions and comments if they're relevant to you. But moving into the open section, Sarah says, +1 on exhibit management. We have many exhibits that include both archival and museum objects. All right. Jesse says, sharing contact information on both systems, single deed of gifts, intake processes, approval processes, starting an intake all the way through. We do bring in one accession that has both ASpace and CSpace collections often. The fact that ASpace has no media handling support for these records and CSpace does came up just last week in a discussion that we had.
Yeah, there's a lot of digital asset management that CollectionSpace can do, and I think there's some complementary things, how that can relate to some of the ASpace data.
All right. Mary says, I'm interested to know if there are any existing extensions for CollectionSpace built by or for users of ArchivesSpace to fill in the gaps that may be addressed by future development. Where can I find more info, please? That's a great question.
So this is Christine. As far as I know, so our community does share a lot of information about plugins and customizations that they've built. But it is open source, and we don't have a comprehensive, definitive list of everything that people have built. But to my knowledge, that hasn't happened. But some good places to look for that kind of information, maybe Jessica, you can put it in the chat. I mean, or whichever place makes sense. We have an awesome ArchivesSpace list on GitHub, and that has a lot of great things that users have done. So I'd suggest that as a place to look first, as well as if something gets built, a place to post the link for it.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, I will drop the link to the awesome ArchivesSpace list in just a second. Maybe once someone starts talking for a little while, and I know I have a second to switch over. But we're gonna keep, and Mary, if I forget to drop it in, I'll make sure I put it in the notes, and you can always email me. All right, I'm gonna read the next question. My question is based on the context of an academic library in a developing country like India, which wants to build a bibliocultural information space by integrating bibliographic resources from the ILS and cultural heritage objects from ArchivesSpace or CollectionSpace in an open source discovery layer like ViewFind. The recent version of ViewFind includes configuration files for ArchivesSpace. In this context, my experience and questions are: 1, ArchivesSpace is OAI PMH compatible, but supports only DC metadata, not domain-specific schema like Lido and Midas. 2, CollectionSpace is not OAI PMH compatible, but supports the domain-specific schemas alongside DCMES. And 3, we need support for schema like Lido, it needs to be OAI PMH compatible so that we can index both bibliographic and cultural resources in a single window search interface in a discovery layer like ViewFind.
So I'll jump in. This is Megan. I'll jump in from the CollectionSpace side. And I think that you have really articulated very well what we are trying to do on the CollectionSpace side, which is make it easy to map data and get data out of CollectionSpace in your sort of preferred format. So whether you want us to be OAI PMH compatible, or people are trying to get resources out, as IIIF manifests. We haven't made a lot of progress on it, but we have been working with a couple of different institutions who are trying to integrate CollectionSpace in very similar workflows to what some folks have talked about. And that's really that has really ended up being the vision that we are working toward, is so that you can choose the discovery layer that you like. So you want to use ViewFind, or you want to use Blacklight, or whatever it is, and then Blacklight can knock on the door, or ViewFind can knock on the door of CollectionSpace and get that data out in the right format, whether it's XML, JSON, whatever it is. And get data out. It is one of those things where we have been working on the CollectionSpace side, certainly for a very long time, just to get sort of core features and functionality up and running. And we feel we're at a place now where, much of that is in place, and so we can turn more attention. And so our roadmap for the next year includes a lot of things like you're talking about. And also then getting data in. So just like we'd be able to express data as something like IIIF, can we also take data in nice standard XML formats, say for example, or something that A-Space could emit. So on the C-Space side, we definitely hear that and think that's the sort of exactly the approach that we're hoping to take to move all this data around, if I understood your question.
Thanks, Megan. And they have followed up. I know I haven't gotten to all the questions. We're going to get to them, but they followed up. So I'm going to go ahead and read their follow-up questions. Are there any provisions in ArchivesSpace or CSpace to support visual navigation on the basis of bibliocultural relationships? Like novel has cover page, is illustrated by an artist has paintings in an archive, a way to visualize and to navigate by relationships shared by objects included.
So again, so I'll answer for C-Space. I don't want to stomp on A-Space answers. So for C-Space, I think that's probably not something that we would build into CollectionSpace, but I think certainly our back-end data model, it's not technically linked open data, but it is structured that way. So you would say, this thing has this cover page, was illustrated by this person. Here are the other holdings that we have. So to send it out to something, like lots of people are putting things up on Wikidata, for example, where you can do those really cool visualizations, I think is another sort of expression of what we're talking about, of being able to send data out to other tools that have that visual navigation. Because I also noticed, just to follow up, I noticed that there was another open question about CSpace power users and if we could link out to their instances. And so I do want to be clear. So CollectionSpace is very much a back-end resource. So it is an administrative resource. It is used by collections managers so that they know, registrars, we know what's on the shelf, we know who gave it to us, we know it's made out of leather, things like that. So something like a big visualization where you're sort of skimming along and making those connections would be something that we would want to send CollectionSpace data to, but would probably not be a CollectionSpace tool.
And this is Christine. There's no stepping on our toes here for sure. CollectionSpace wise, those are not things that we are community supported software, and we're also driven by what the community is telling us are their priorities. I think we all have, like CollectionSpace, shoring up core functionality has been an important part of what we've been doing. from the beginning, and then sort of building in highest priority enhancements or things that others in the community have built and have contributed to us code-wise. I think that's really where we are at right now. So I would say that we haven't heard a lot of interest in those kinds of features, but that down the road that we certainly might, or if we think webinars like this tell us some more about if there are pockets of groups of people in the community that have interests that haven't really surfaced too much, that can be really helpful. But I think sort of where we are at right now, we haven't heard by acclamation that those are directions that we should be going at.
Thanks. All right, we have 2 minutes, 5 questions. We're gonna do it. So Jesse says, for exhibits, we're having to create a duplicate shell record for our archival materials that are featured in CSpace in order to link those objects to the exhibit. It would be nice if we could just pull an object right from CSpace or ASpace and link it as a relationship to the CSpace exhibit procedure. Which it sounds like a lot of people would be interested in something like that. Paul says, hi from Maine Maritime Museum. Linking accessions, combined searching between objects and archives, and combined authority files, such as people's names, are also issues that we run into here. We'd love to have one place to search for materials about a specific ship, captain, etc. That sounds fun. Where we might have archival as well as object material that could be useful for researchers. Right, thanks, Paul. Marjorie follows up and says their university art collection is in past perfect, would love to migrate to CSpace and have shared authorities, same accessioning process, shared lookup, etc. with ASpace, and the artifacts are currently in ASpace. We migrated our previous collection management database in ArchivesSpace, and the artifacts are now lurking in ArchivesSpace, very ugly. So a migration of those records into CSpace would be ideal, but also future opportunities for splitting an accession between ASpace and CSpace. Mary commented on that and said, +1, there are items managed by our archives like props and costumes that might be better represented in a system like CSpace, but we'd want them to be discoverable alongside the archives. Julia says, +1, Mary. We've struggled to manage our object collections for years, and I'm excited about the opportunity to try them out in something like CSpace. All right. And then Jesse follows up by clarifying the multitude of tools that they are using at the Ohio History Connection. So I'm going to go ahead and move that into live or answered live. Nick says the Center of Southwest Studies at Fort Lewis College manages museum objects, college artifacts, regional archival material, and college archives. We currently have a management database that uses Microsoft Access and has integrated everything. We are currently starting to migrate to CollectionSpace, and we are looking at ArchivesSpace for archival collections. One issue we have is that the college owns everything, and we need to generate reports for the college that shows the value of the collections and to use and for audits and insurance policies. So we would need the ASpace and CSpace to work together to generate these reports.
That's a great use case. Thanks, Nick. I remember visiting the University of Indiana once and being surprised that the university art collection was under like security. It wasn't under art history or the provost or anything, but exactly that, because it was this sort of asset that needed protecting and valuing and so on. So so I'm glad. I think that was not a use case that Linda and I had on any of our lists, and now we've heard it a couple of times about insurance and valuation and being able to really sort of properly do that in the university setting. So thank you to everybody who mentioned that.
Thanks. And then Mary says research request management functionality was mentioned by CSpace, and I'm looking for a way to do this for the materials in ASpace. Just wanting to share another use case, no question. And Mary Claire, I'm an institution without a lending library, so no OPAC. Thanks, Mary. All right, so we are past time, but we have gotten through all of the questions. There's tons of conversation happening in the answered questions, which I really appreciate. It's so nice to see everyone contributing and adding to others' use cases. I will stay in this room for another 5 minutes, just in case you're typing something out right now and you don't want, you're about to lose it and you're trying to write that novel that Megan asked for. I'll give you the time to do that and to respond and add anything else to the Q&A that you might want to respond. But since we are finished with the open questions and I don't see any raised hands, we'll go ahead and conclude the discussion. I will turn it back over to the panelists for just a second to see if there's anything else they'd like to add before we wrap up.
Nothing to add, but thank you so much to everybody for being here. And it's really good to have our CollectionSpace colleagues with us on this webinar.
Yeah, this has actually been very helpful to myself, and I'm sure to Megan as well. And I feel like we just started these conversations with you and the hour is up. So I really encourage you to reach out to either of us so that we can continue this. As Megan mentioned, we're just in the brainstorming stage of figuring out what are the most important priority issues to integrate with ASpace. And we would love to continue these conversations after this webinar. So please feel free to reach out to us.
And we have your names, so we may reach out to you too.
Yes, absolutely.
Get ready for those phone calls and those emails. And so we'll share, this will probably find a home on the CollectionSpace wiki. And so, we'll put up sort of the notes and the use cases. And then, in the happy event that things then start turning into functional requirements and wireframes and things like that, we'll be sure to share them out and share them with Jessica and Christine to share out with you all so that you can see, how things are progressing as they progress. But huge thanks to everybody for lending us your time today.
Yeah, let me just echo everyone else's appreciation for those of you attending, especially those of you that stayed past the hour. I really appreciate everyone who raised their hands to unmute themselves and all this conversation. It's so nice to see a really robust conversation happen. I very much appreciate it. And I will stay in the room for another 5 minutes, just in case anyone's still typing. And I think we'll wrap up with what Linda has just commented, that we've long suspected there are others out there with these issues. Thanks for confirming it and giving us all a chance to share our needs and potential solutions. Thank you, everybody.